And thanks, Chair. I'm not a member of the committee, so I appreciate it.
Very welcome.
Thank you. Honorary member. And thanks to NOAC for their contribution and for all their fantastic gathering of information. It's really a brilliant resource, I have to say. I want to sort of preempt any of my questions by saying I'm also aware not only do you do a lot of hard work in gathering this, but I know that ordinary workers in our local authorities are frankly pinned to the collar trying to deal with the volume of work that they have, and in many cases are absolutely overrun, particularly in the area of housing. So if any of my questions seem to be critical, if you like, of the performance that you've analysed in your report, it's not a criticism of the staff, but it's really what I think your reports do is help raise questions about where performance is happening in a positive way or isn't happening when it needs to be happening, and points to things that need to be addressed. And obviously the big one, as I think everybody is aware, is the performance on housing. I mean, one of the things, and I have to say, if you've got a fan outside of the people on this committee, one big fan you have is Mel Reynolds, the housing commentator, who uses your figures to put together an analysis of social housing output every year. And he says, if you want the facts, go to NOAC. Go to the NOAC figures. You get the real facts. And so it really is a great resource. And one of the things, I don't know to what extent you do this actually in the latest report, because I haven't read it all. The indicator report, but I've read quite a bit of it. But one of the things he did, which is very useful, is if you take the total local authority housing stock, which you're very concerned with in your reports, and looking at our progress in either increasing or not increasing that housing stock, if I understand your report, because you take into account demolition sales and all the rest of it, which cuts through some of the stuff about we did this, we did that, but what's the actual net result, which is brilliant. But one of the things Mel Reynolds does is then compares that with previous years. And I wonder, maybe I haven't seen the index, but it's really very fascinating when you do that, because he took your report in 2017, for example, on housing stock, and then took your 2021 report, and it really is stark, where the Dublin City housing stock, your figures show, is 268 less than it was 5 years ago, which I think would shock most people. But it's based on figures that are provided in your indicator reports. So I wonder, do you do those sort of slightly more, what's the word, over time comparisons to assess how we're doing, not just from the beginning of one year to the beginning or to the end of that year, but also over time? Because I was quite shocked. Cork County Council was minus 302, the stock, when you took into account demolitions and sales. And again, that's based on your figures. Down, my own area, was plus 35 over 5 years. It was really quite extraordinary. Fingal County Council a bit better, plus 780. But these are not good figures when you think about the scale of the crisis, and when you hear about the figures that are being bandied about in terms of increased social housing output. To see minus figures over a five-year period is really quite shocking. But I suppose my question to you guys is, do you do that kind of comparison? Because Mel Reynolds has done it with your stuff, and he could only do it with stuff that you've provided. But I think it is a very interesting thing to do. Also, one of the things that you do by breaking up what is actual local authority additional stock and AHB additional stock, and your main focus is local authority. I mean, is it something that you kind of would remark upon, if you like, that a very high proportion of the new social housing is actually AHB? and in many cases it's quite skewed. It's different in different areas, but you have a very, very low output, particularly when the figures for the 4 Dublin local authorities are shockingly bad in the last year or two, in that actual local authority new bills were 0 for the first 2 quarters of last year for all four councils, but the figures are slightly improved when you look at AHBs, particularly in purchases. And is that something that you remark upon, or, and I know you say you can't stray into policy area, and I get that, but to what extent do you feel we need to highlight that? The other thing I was just interested in, because it was quite remarkable, is and I mean, I'm not looking for reasons to criticise anybody, but I just found it quite a stark contrast. You had a table H6, long-term homeless adults, where you know in general you've noted a very alarming rise in the number of people in emergency accommodation and so on. But you had a table which says number of adults in emergency accommodation that are long-term homeless as a percentage of the total number of homeless adults in emergency accommodation at the end of 2021. And in Dublin City, it showed 56% of the people in emergency accommodation were long-term homeless. But in Dún Laoghaire down it was 0. In Fingal it was 0. And in South Dublin County Council it was 0. Now, I just wonder, am I missing something there? Is there an explanation for that? Because quite frankly, even from the casework I'm dealing with myself, and I'm not looking for reasons to be critical, that is definitely not the case. So I wonder, are they all being accounted for within the Dublin Housing Regional Executive, which is covering the 4 areas? Is that...
Dublin effectively collecting information for the other 3 local authorities.
Okay. So the actual percentage for the whole 4 local authorities, is it 56% or is it, do you know what I mean? I'm trying to work that out.
It's one figure is provided for this.
The one figure stands for the 4, so we have that on page 73 of the report just at the end.
Yeah.
Deputy says that Dublin City Council manages homelessness responses on behalf of the Dublin authorities. So Dún Laoghaire, Down, Fingal and South Dublin councils are included under Dublin City Council. So your question now is the figure 4 local authority-wide figure or just Dublin?
No, it's Dublin.
Yeah, or, yes, exactly. Exactly. Or how is that broke? I mean, do we not? Maybe we don't have the breakdown.
I don't think we have that breakdown of the 56, but the 56 is for the 4 local authorities collected by Dublin.
Okay. Well, I think that in itself is a very interesting and, I have to say, depressing figure, that more than half of the people in emergency accommodation are long-term homeless. And I don't know, is that further broken down in terms of the length of time, or do you have further information on the length of time that people are spending in homeless accommodation?
No, it's not the length of time.
I mean, I know, and I don't know if it's appropriate for us to suggest other stuff, because you are compiling so much information, but I think the length of time people are in over years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years would be interesting information, probably depressing information. And also children, I think, is something we should consider, because one of the worst aspects of all of this is children long-term in emergency accommodation. So I don't know if it's possible to collate those slightly more broken down figures. The other thing, just in a similar vein, I just wanted to ask is whether, again, it's appropriate to suggest or for you to consider, or it has to be the Minister who says that things that might be sort of additional areas of information which would be helpful. The housing allocations, and in particular, whether the allocations are 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms, because there is a big issue, certainly apparent in my area, and I think it's emerging in many places, about the fact that the allocations and the new stuff that is being developed, in many cases 1 and 2 bedrooms, particularly coming from Part 5, whereas there's virtually no movement on 3 and 4 bedroom lists, because it's seen as an easier win, if you like, to get 1 and 2 bedrooms. So I don't know if that, I mean, that's a lot of detail, but it would be very interesting detail, I think, to have. And the other one, I don't know if it's, again, something you've discussed or thought about, is the reactivation or the number of vacant properties. Now that's an issue that's becoming a big issue. And I don't just mean local authority vacant houses, but vacant houses in areas and the success of local authorities in reactivating them. And I'm nearly out of time, so I'm going to be real quick. The number of people removed from lists as a result of going over the thresholds, and you know what I mean?
The income threshold?
Income thresholds, yeah. And obviously up to date, you haven't probably been gathering those figures, but it seems to me that would be an interesting thing to look at, because it's now becoming very apparent that people, even if they're over those social housing income thresholds, still have serious difficulties in being able to, and that's why we've got cost rental and that's why we've affordable. But many of those people are now not eligible for things like HAP, aren't eligible for things like social housing, and just trying to quantify that would be useful. And very lastly, two last things. Zoned land available for housing by a local authority, that is owned by local authorities, that is available for residential, and what's been done with that land, it seems to me would be a useful thing, because there's a big issue certainly in our area of land that is in the possession of the local authority, is zoned for residential development, earmarked for local authority housing, but where even the servicing of the land is not being done, and whether there's progress being made on the servicing of land that could be used to deliver housing. Very finally, an issue that is emerging as well is the length of waiting time, and this isn't a criticism of the staff, I suspect it's a thing to do with understaffing, the waiting time for medical and welfare assessments because a lot of people now are trying to get themselves medically or on welfare grounds or on homeless grounds assessed, and the length of time that people are waiting now has gone from a few weeks over the last maybe 2 years ago to now people are waiting months and months and months, and it just suggests that there's a problem there. I don't know if you came across that in your interaction with the local authorities, or if it'd be a useful thing to look at, because obviously it's a big problem, particularly if people are very, very sick, as in many cases they are, very disabled or whatever it might be, children, health and welfare issues. That's a worrying thing that I think we need to kind of have figures on. So sorry for going on so long.
No, thank you for the Chair, Deputy Boyd Barrett. There's a lot in that note. Some of the points I would take back to the working groups, the relevant working groups, and provide updates to. But a number of points, just in relation to a kind of particular topic or theme, and I'm delighted to hear you reference Mel Reynolds' exercise and I suppose comparing, contrast your reports from 17 to kind of present day, like a very interesting work practice, and impressive to hear it. We have done that with some. In some particular sectors, but certainly not at all. But it's food for thought for us in terms of them, that like-for-like comparison. There might be a theme, there might be a theme or a topic that just becomes, prevalent all of a sudden. And we, from our perspective in Cork, we could do a mini best practice seminar to focus on particular areas. So if the topic, for example, is housing, like to bring the various local authorities who are either doing some very good things, like platform speakers who are doing some very good work in particular areas, and then all the local authorities who have a different approach, who have some very good results, and then invite the wider local authorities and showcase that good practice in that particular sense. That's the extent of our legislative remit, but it does allow us to capture an issue, and topical isn't the word, but to capture an issue that might just become a very big issue that you couldn't kind of predict at this point in the year. Just in relation to kind of stock managed by local authorities. So in terms of the local government determines, and in terms of the kind of stock that's owned and managed by AHBs, and why is it excluded from local authorities? So we'll say for the purposes of the PI report, the NOAC social housing indicator only records housing stock that is owned and managed and maintained by the local authorities. But I do take your point that, a lot of AHBs are now effectively, kind of taking ownership or, developing social housing stock on behalf of the council. I could see the delineation becoming less between the local authority owned stock. Now, again, that would be a matter for, like our current PI is structured in a way that we just look at that, but I'm certainly open to kind of, even though there is no regulator for approved housing bodies, I'm sure it's kind of collating that information of data, but I do take that point at a kind of philosophical level that the delineation is becoming less clear. Just in relation to the process around how the performance indicators are added to the report. So we review the indicators every year, and we determine whether they require any kind of element of refinement or any element of clarification, and introduce new indicators. So 2 years ago we introduced climate change and economic development spend. And that's of a particular time. So it depends in terms of the evolution of the issues that are affecting local government that we would kind of recalibrate our PIs to include, where necessary, collation of data on that particular heading. So again, we can't predict it now, but in 2 years' time there might be an issue that we just couldn't have thought of, but we add to that. But there's a number of other particular points that you made, Deputy Boyd Barrett, at a policy level, that I will take back to our working groups and provide a written update to the committee.